The first human ship to enter alien space was not supposed to be there. It had no diplomatic clearance, no military escort, and no knowledge that the violet haze ahead marked a border older than its entire species. To the crew of the survey ship Ardent Finch, the region looked like a strange concentration of ionized dust around a chain of cold stars. To the civilization that owned it, the region was the sacred perimeter of the Ashari Quiet, a volume of space where no engine was permitted to speak above a whisper and no mind from outside had been allowed for 7,000 years. The Ardent Finch crossed the boundary at half-thrust while chasing a false signal from one of its lost probes. Its captain had been dead for 6 days. Its executive officer was unconscious in medical suspension. Its navigation deck was being managed by a botanist, 2 maintenance technicians, and a junior cartographer who had lied about his age to qualify for deep-range service. The ship had suffered an accident in a gravitational shear, and every automated system was arguing with every other automated system in a tone that would have sounded calm only to machines. It entered the Ashari Quiet leaking oxygen, broadcasting corrupted telemetry, and carrying a greenhouse full of pollinating insects that had escaped into the ventilation. They did not use alarms. Their entire civilization had been built around the avoidance of suddenness. The Ashari were thin, translucent beings who lived in slow cities grown inside the magnetospheres of gas giants. Their bodies could be harmed by sharp sound, bright light, violent acceleration, and the emotional discharge of crowded minds. They considered most spacefaring species unbearable. After the old era of invasion, they had withdrawn behind treaties, censor veils, and a reputation so severe that even empires lowered their engines near Ashari borders. When the human vessel appeared, the border listeners assumed it was a weapon. Then they assumed it was a corpse. Then they received the first clean fragment of transmission and found an exhausted human voice reciting repair steps to a machine that no longer answered. The voice belonged to Meena Rao, the botanist who had taken command because she was the only conscious officer with a complete neural interface. She was not trained for first contact. She was trained to keep citrus trees alive in low gravity and to identify fungal stress before it turned lethal. The Ashari watched in horror as the small ship opened part of itself to vacuum, expelled flaming debris, sealed the wound with emergency foam, and continued moving deeper into forbidden territory. Human survival methods looked, to Ashari eyes, like ritual self-destruction. Every time the ship saved itself, it did so by damaging itself in a new and inventive way. The border listeners reported that the trespasser was unstable, wounded, and surrounded by an atmosphere of frantic biochemical signals. They recommended remote paralysis. The Ashari expected the humans to respond with aggression. Instead, the Ardent Finch began broadcasting medical requests in every format its damaged library could assemble. It sent images of lungs, blood, fever charts, broken bones, radiation burns, and a crude animated sequence showing unconscious crew members in suspension tanks. It sent botanical data as well, because Meena did not know which life forms mattered to aliens and refused to assume plants were less important. Among the files were scans of seed vaults, soil cultures, larvae, and the escaped bees that had become a glittering nuisance inside Corridor 9. The council almost ignored the biological appendix. One young Ashari listener did not. Her name translated poorly into human language, but later historians called her Sia of the Low Current. Sia noticed that the greenhouse aboard the Ardent Finch contained a living organism with a resonance pattern similar to extinct Ashari sky blooms, delicate atmospheric plants that had once filled the upper winds of their home giants with fragrant drifting nets. The sky blooms had died during the invasion era, when foreign engines poisoned the magnetospheres. Their loss had shaped Ashari culture as deeply as war had shaped their law. Sia requested permission to study the greenhouse feed. The elders resisted, then yielded because the human medical requests had become weaker. Inside the feed, she saw chaos beyond anything permitted in the quiet. Leaves trembled under failing vents. Water globes floated free. Soil packets had ruptured. Bees moved through the air in golden loops, indifferent to the collapse of civilizations. Meena Rao appeared twice in the frame, pale with exhaustion, tying damaged branches to support rods while the ship shook around her. She paused once to cover a broken seed tray with her own jacket. Against council protocol, Sia opened a narrow response channel. She did not send language. She sent a simple pressure pattern, a calming pulse used by Ashari caretakers to slow panic in injured juveniles. The ardent finch received it through a damaged sensor plate and translated it as a rhythmic power fluctuation. Mina, half-conscious and running on stimulants, heard the pattern through the deck. She did not understand it, but her pulse slowed. She placed one hand against the wall and matched her breathing to the alien signal. Sia convinced the council that the humans were not attacking. The council allowed a remote medical intervention under conditions so strict that 3 elder jurists fainted from the stress of approving them. Ashari drones entered the ardent finch through a maintenance wound and moved through corridors with the delicacy of drifting seeds. They found humans strapped into chairs, sealed in tanks, asleep under emergency sedation, or crawling through access tubes to repair systems they did not understand well enough to fear. The drones repaired atmosphere first. Then coolant. Then the suspension tanks. Then, against direct instruction, they followed a swarm of bees into the greenhouse and stabilized the temperature before the citrus trees froze. Ashari citizens watched the forbidden feeds in private, then in public, then in gatherings large enough to challenge the quiet. Humans were louder than any species the Ashari had observed. Their faces changed constantly. Their bodies leaked heat and salt and microscopic storms. They touched everything. They named broken tools. They argued with doors. They mourned their captain by continuing his maintenance schedule. They frightened the Ashari, but they also did something no invading species had ever done. They adapted their noise when asked. Mina learned the calming pulse before she learned a single Ashari word. Once translation began, she ordered the remaining crew to lower internal alarms, soften lighting, reduce non-essential speech near alien drones, and move slowly when Ashari envoys appeared on screens. Human restraint did not look graceful at first. It looked like a room full of storms trying not to thunder. Yet the attempt mattered. For the Ashari, who had spent millennia believing other species equated accommodation with weakness, the effort was almost incomprehensible. Mina became the center of everything because she did not want to be. The Ashari Council expected a captain, soldier, or appointed envoy. They received a botanist who kept asking about humidity, soil exchange, fungal quarantine, and whether anyone had a quiet room where her crew could grieve properly. She carried no authority beyond emergency command, but the crew followed her because she had kept them alive. The Ashari respected authority reluctantly. They respected caretaking instinctively. It was almost a disaster. The Ashari had strict laws against foreign biological introduction. Several elders recoiled as though she had placed explosives in the chamber. Mina did not press. She withdrew the case, requested a sealed observation environment, and spent the next hours recording every organism, risk, dependency, and failure mode in plain scientific terms. The Ashari listened. They had expected hunger for access, technology, and status. They found instead a civilization that carried gardens across the dark because humans became psychologically unstable when surrounded only by metal and mission clocks. Sia proposed an experiment. No open planting. No cultural exchange ceremony. No symbolic union. Just one sealed bloom chamber, Ashari built, human monitored, with soil isolated behind 7 barriers and all genetic drift tracked by independent systems. The council approved because the proposal sounded cautious enough to preserve dignity. Mina approved because cautious was better than dead. It should not have mattered. It was a small green thing under glass, ordinary to humans, edible, fragrant, and medically unremarkable. Yet when its first leaves opened under the filtered glow of lumen ash, the chamber sensors detected a volatile pattern that stirred ancestral memory in Ashari observers. Not because basil resembled sky blooms, but because scent itself had nearly vanished from Ashari public life after the invasion era. Their cities had become sterile by necessity, then by habit, then by philosophy. The basil plant did not heal their history. It contradicted it. Humanity learned from the Ashari as well. The ardent finch crew had come from a species accustomed to solving discomfort by overpowering it. In the quiet, that habit failed. A slammed hatch could injure a host. An argument could trigger medical distress. A celebration could become an assault. Humans learned the discipline of softness. Mechanics patted their tools. Pilots trained in slow gesture. Engineers redesigned cooling fans to hum below Ashari thresholds. Mina recorded the changes carefully and sent them home once communication buoys were repaired. Her report reached Earth 18 months later and became the first document in a new field called diplomatic ergonomics. The Rawn were not an empire in the theatrical sense. They did not announce invasion. They acquired. Their fleet specialized in treaty loopholes, salvage claims, debt enforcement, and the patient legal capture of weaker systems. When they learned that an unauthorized human ship had been sheltered inside the quiet, they filed a claim under an obsolete border clause. By their reading, the ardent finch was unlicensed salvage, its crew were biological contaminants, and any Ashari aid given to them constituted treaty violation. The claim was absurd, but the Rawn had won systems with absurd claims before. Law, in their hands, was a net. She had not crossed the boundary by intention. She had not asked to become a symbol. Yet the claim named her crew as salvage, and there were few words humans hated more when applied to living people. The ardent finch could not fight the Rawn. It could barely fly. Earth was too distant to send defense in time. The Ashari possessed powerful border systems, but using them openly would violate the restraint doctrines that held their society together. She requested a public hearing under the oldest hospitality clause of Ashari law, a clause so ceremonial that most legal scholars had treated it as poetry. It allowed any sheltered life form, however foreign, to demonstrate mutual caretaking before removal. The Rawn accepted because they expected spectacle and weakness. The hearing was broadcast across the quiet, into neighboring jurisdictions, and eventually across half the civilized halo. She presented the ardent finch records from the accident. She showed human crew members using their remaining oxygen to stabilize the greenhouse because the plants were part of the life support system. She showed Ashari drones repairing human lungs, then repairing citrus roots. She showed Saya's first calming pulse, the moment Mina matched her breathing to it, and the medical data proving both heart rates changed. She showed basil growing in a sealed chamber under Ashari supervision, then the sensor readings of Ashari citizens who reported reduced grief response while watching it. She showed humans learning quiet. She showed Ashari learning scent. She made no grand claim that friendship erased law. She demonstrated that the law had already done what it had been written to do. It had protected life long enough for obligation to become reciprocal. Not formally. Not immediately. But across the quiet, millions of Ashari heard the old contempt beneath the legal polish. Emotional contamination was what invaders had called Ashari distress during the war that killed the sky blooms. Emotional contamination was the phrase used in archived orders that justified burning their upper atmospheres because Ashari suffering interfered with efficient occupation. The Rawn had not meant to awaken memory. They had meant to sound superior. Instead, they gave the quiet a shape for its anger. For 7,000 years, the quiet had kept records of every treaty abuse, every illegal engine burn, every salvage fraud, every border pressure tactic committed near its space. The records had been preserved out of pain, never used because using them meant re-entering the violence of public dispute. Now, guided by human legal translators and Ashari memory keepers, the quiet released everything. Not as accusation, but as evidence. The Rawn network of claims began collapsing within days. Systems they had intimidated found precedent. Debts were challenged. Salvage seizures were reversed. Hidden coercion became visible. The net tore. The Rawn attempted one final maneuver. A small enforcement fleet approached the boundary, claiming authority to inspect the ardent finch. They expected the Ashari to yield or overreact. Instead, they found the border filled with ships from species that had spent centuries resenting Ron law and fearing Ron reprisal. At the center floated the damaged human survey vessel, patched with Ashari membranes, engines dampened to a whisper, greenhouse lights glowing through repaired glass. It was not a warship. That made its presence worse for the Ron. Destroying it would prove every accusation. Ignoring it would concede the claim. The Ashari did not celebrate loudly, because they were still Ashari. But across Lumen Esh, scent chambers opened for the first time in public. Carefully, legally, under strict filters and medical supervision, citizens entered spaces where basil, citrus, moss, and reconstructed sky bloom analogues released faint fragrances into shared air. Many wept. Some could not remain. Some returned every day. The quiet did not become noisy. It became alive in more registers than fear had allowed. The Ashari changed too. Not quickly. Never completely. They did not abandon the quiet. They revised it. The border remained, but it acquired listening ports designed for distress. Outsider contact was still limited, but refusal was no longer automatic. The council created the Rao chambers, sealed biological exchange habitats named after a human botanist who had entered their space by accident and insisted that plants deserved evacuation plans. In those chambers, extinct fragrances were researched, foreign ecosystems were studied with reverent caution, and young Ashari learned that protection and isolation were not the same virtue. The title historians later gave the event was inaccurate in one sense. One human ship did enter alien space, and everything did change, but not because humanity was stronger, wiser, or chosen by destiny. The ardent finch changed everything because it arrived broken. It forced an ancient people to decide whether safety meant the absence of strangers or the courage to shelter one. It forced humans to learn that kindness without attention could still cause harm. It exposed predatory law by placing one vulnerable crew inside one sacred border and making the galaxy watch what care required. On the museum's inner wall, the official account avoided heroic language. It stated that a damaged human survey ship crossed a prohibited boundary, received aid, offered care, provoked law, restored memory, and began the revision of interstellar hospitality. Beneath the account, in smaller script, was a note added by joint vote of human and Ashari curators. In later years, scholars argued over whether the ardent finch had been lucky, guided by chance, or protected by the strange mercy that sometimes appears when disaster strips away pride. The crew never answered those arguments. They remembered loose soil, dim corridors, shaking hands, and an alien pulse soft enough to pass through fear without breaking it. The Ashari remembered the same moment from the other side of the hull. That shared memory became a quiet treaty before ink ever touched a page. It taught both peoples that contact was not a ceremony. It was attention, given before certainty arrived. It was still so. Every child who visited learned the old sequence. A ship entered. A listener answered. A plant grew. A claim failed. A quiet civilization spoke. The galaxy became harder to own and easier to shelter. That was how everything changed.